Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar presentation. We will begin here shortly, and we appreciate your patience in the meantime. Again, for those of you just joining us, we will begin here shortly, and we appreciate your patience in the meantime. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So again, hello to everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presentation titled How to Develop a Security Mindset Within Your Dev Teams, brought to you by Shift Left. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items that I need to go over with you. First, if you have any questions for our presenters today, post those into the questions panel so we can get to them after the presentation. Secondly, if you experience any technical difficulties today, please post a message into the chat panel and I will work with you to resolve those issues. Last on my housekeeping list, today's presentation is being recorded and it will be available shortly after the webinar concludes. Now that we're through the housekeeping items, I would like to introduce you to today's presenters. First, Arun Balakrishnan, who is the Senior Director of Products at Shift Left. And secondly, Malcolm McDonald, who is the CEO and author from Hacksplaining. At this time, I'd like to pass it off to both of them for their presentation.
Excellent. And thank you for that introduction. Hey, Malcolm, how are you?
Good. How you doing, Arun?
Excellent. Malcolm, I would like to start off with the discussion we were having last week. Right. So this metric that caught my eye, wherein we were looking at what are people doing with the vulnerabilities they find using static analysis. And an interesting metric wherein they said 60% of vulnerabilities that they find don't get fixed. Right? And even what they do fix takes over 3 months. Right? So, I mean, you and I have been in the security business for quite some time, and we keep hearing teams talking about, yeah, we shouldn't miss a single vulnerability. We want to find every single thing out there. We want to ensure that it's all true positives, low false positives. But on the other side of the spectrum, we realize, irrespective of what they're doing there, it's not getting fixed. Right? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, yeah, there's the idea of how we want to be writing codes in our head, and there's the day-to-day work of actually doing programming. So the idea of entirely bug-free code is somewhat fantastical, but also at the same time, you're saying that high priority security issues are still kind of sitting there in a lot of large kind of often legacy code bases, simply because it's a distraction from the day-to-day work of building the websites, the applications we want to kind of sell to our clients. And these kind of things, until they get exploited, they often get pushed to the back burner just because of like the practicalities of what we're trying to do. So the question really comes down to how do we make it easier to fix these things so they're not they're treated as high priority, and also they can be addressed in a timely fashion. So if you want to flick over to the next slide.
Yeah.
The technical difficulties here. Yeah, so as you say, like software like Shift Left, which like your product, is very good at kind of analyzing a complex code bases, picking up either vulnerabilities or potential hotspots and saying these are red flags, they should be addressed. From there, it kind of comes down to how prepared is your development team, how ready do they feel to address these kind of vulnerabilities, which are often quite kind of complex and nuanced in how they're exploited. But once you understand how the exploit works, you can kind of there's a handful of security principles you can apply to kind of block up those holes and kind of secure your code base. The problem to kind of getting there is you have this kind of wealth of kind of information on the internet, but it's not well organized around kind of security content, and it's not kind of focused on, it can sometimes feel extremely abstracted from the code you're staring at on the screen that's the tool is saying this is insecure. So really the big gap, I would say, in how we kind of train our development teams and like learn about security ourselves is going from a kind of large kind of messy kind of data dump like the OWASP website to kind of targeted understanding for like this, my code is insecure for these reasons. It could be exploited in these 3 simple steps. And this is the tool or kind of technique I need to apply to kind of block up or kind of protect myself and the team here. So it's really about kind of providing the right kind of information to the development team when they're in a context to solve a problem. And then generally speaking, developers, they love to learn on their own. So once they have the information, they will start applying that and kind of teaching others. So it's a very kind of viral thing when done correctly, but it's just asking your development team to Google or having a couple of PowerPoint presentations once a year is not a good solution to pushing your team towards kind of a secure development mindset.
Yes, let's touch on that, the secure developing mindset, right? So from what you mentioned, I get that the current behavior in most organizations is, hey, I have a problem in hand, I need to solve and move on, go back to whatever I was working on as my project. So security is an afterthought. It is not inherently in how they approach the issue. Is that a good summarization of that?
Yeah, I think that's very true, and especially in larger organizations. I mean, I come from a development background and then came over to the cybersecurity side. And in a lot of kind of big companies, there's a tension between the development team who just wants to build stuff and get things done, and then the security team who are there poking holes, trying to stop things happening, putting controls in place. And these 2 sides are kind of, there's an antagonism between them because they're at cross purposes. Whereas really, we're all trying to solve the same problem, which is building software in a secure way and pushing it out and kind of to clients and users, and giving more tools like Shift Left, where it kind of gives more insight to the development team earlier on and brings it into the development lifecycle, empowers them to understand the problem, and then they're kind of more than happy to work with the security folks who are basically saying, okay, here's some other things we can add on top. And there's an understanding about why things have to be built in a certain way. And it's not, as you say, it shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be a checklist. You shouldn't be like being told off or over email for like, you let these number of security bugs here. Nobody wants to work in that environment. And it's not useful for like producing secure software anyway. There's no amount of audits after the fact that can really replace a development team who kind of understands the security issues in their bones.
Yeah. So maybe for the audience to understand better, so when I was talking to a few of my customers who have been doing this for a long time, especially from a security team perspective, the anecdote I got from them is, okay, as a developer who has a security mindset, if say they're adding a form to a website, right? Inherently they understand, okay, hey, this is input from a user, which in their mind they automatically think this is attacker controlled input, and they, as a first step, validate it as part of their implementation, right? Versus coming back to it, somebody having to say that, hey, this is untrusted input, you need to validate it, and then them trying to go put in validation in place. Is that a good example of a security mindset?
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, as developers, we tend to, you want to kind of get us understanding of the problem in the simplest form, produce the minimum viable product that kind of does what it is required, and then you tend to think, okay, what could go wrong here? What other input could be applied to this to kind of by an attacker to take advantage of this endpoint? And that can be like a quite sort of onerous thought processes if you haven't seen a bunch of examples. But when you know that, well, in actual fact, there's like 3 rules. There's like treat untrusted content as potentially malicious. Make sure you encode anything you put on a page. Make sure you use parameterized statements when you're talking to kind of a database. There's a handful of like good security principles you can just apply straight away. And then they won't get flagged by either the static analysis software or a QA audit or the security teams, and it won't come back to you as like being hit around the head, like you did something wrong. But we can be in such a rush to kind of answer the ticket and push the code out that moment's pause of saying, okay, what could go wrong here? What malicious input could kind of be sent can even get forgotten about, or just weigh on us and like kind of, you can make it very indecisive if you're like.
Yeah. So then, Malcolm, this is again a question I keep getting from customers, and I think you touched on it early, wherein the developers ask us, well, what's the big deal? I mean, if you say cross-site scripting in Java, I'm just going to fire up Google or YouTube, watch a couple of videos, and just follow what they do. I mean, developers say that's something they do often, even for language constructs, right? Where they have to do something, they look up Stack Overflow or something and take a solution and use it. So what's so different in security? And I think you've got a good example highlighting the issues with that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, we all use, thank goodness for Stack Overflow. It's on everyone's bookmark bar, and like as developers, it's often the first place to go when you're dealing with a particularly technical solution. And you're right, there is a kind of wealth of information out there, well indexed by Google, but the problem is it doesn't always, just mapping that mass information to what the code I'm writing right now can be quite intimidating. And the evidence for that is the fact that you can list out the top 10 security vulnerabilities that have appeared in code bases over the past 2 decades, and they're somewhat unchanging. We're still seeing injection vulnerabilities, we're still seeing cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. And if we were doing a better job of like telling our development team about how to fix them quickly and easily, then they wouldn't be issues anymore. But the OWASP top 10 is largely unchanging. They shuffle around the categories, but it's always the simple things that kind of catches out. So yeah, if we can flip over to the next slide, this is probably the most vanilla vulnerability you can think of, which is pick a big programming language, Java, pick one of the nasty kind of vulnerabilities that crops up, but still very common, SQL injection. So you're going to go to Google, you're going to type in, assuming you had absolutely, this is the first time writing a Java app talking to a database, you're going to like, I've heard about SQL injection, or the tool has highlighted this as an issue. I'm going to Google this, and it being Google, within 50 milliseconds, you have 6 million results, which is an astonishing amount of information, not untypical for Google, but also nobody's going to go past the front page. It's just such a huge data set that you're left kind of navigating and trying to, as a developer, make a reckoning about what's the most reliable source of information here. So
yeah. And Malcolm, I think, and I've seen this in real life, right? I've seen developers search for solutions like this. And as you rightly pointed out, now you're leaving it in Google's hands based on the keywords you used. Whatever shows up in those first 10 results is pretty much what you would pick, right? So,
yeah. So it's often like there can be an element of kind of sometimes useful blogs, sometimes less useful blogs. I don't want to say W3 schools or anything like that, but it's there's an element of like competition between information providers. I mean, what I think it's Chrome feature now, where it says you have visited this page 3 times in the past 24 hours. So it's at least helps you kind of navigate the mess a bit more easily. But it's still like there's a rat's nest of information to get through to kind of get to the core of the problem.
Perfect. And then let's see what happens next. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's almost always nowadays for software vulnerabilities, your top link is Stack Overflow, because it's and as we mentioned, it's a great resource for like very detailed information about specific problems, but for more sort of general holistic topics, it can be somewhat of a nightmare to navigate. As you can see here, there's just hundreds of pages on Stack Overflow. It's like which one has the right, and each one has a set of answers, the same question being asked over and over again. So if we kind of think, but it's naturally the first place you're going to go because it's a great place for actionable information.
And
so,
Malcolm, so another thing I've noticed, I mean, as I see this, I see some red flags here, right? The results from 2009, right? That's what, 12 years old. I mean, in your experience, like, don't things change over time? Like, aren't there better ways of doing some things today, or is a 12-year-old solution still the best possible solution?
In Java, typically it is. I mean, it's the same problem we've been seeing for 12 years, which is astonishing. And part of the nature of the way Java develops is like they never deprecate. They may deprecate all APIs. They don't kind of remove elements from the code base, but it's solving SQL injection is something we've known about for more than a decade, but it's still a vulnerability that's very, very common.
But that throws an interesting point. So you mentioned Java doesn't deprecate much, so it's okay. But then, say, imagine you were looking at, say, Python, and then like you're doing Python 3, and then it might be a Python 2 solution, right? So there could be issues specific to languages and frameworks. So like maybe the age of the solution does matter in those scenarios.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the flip side of this is a language like Node.js, where the correct solution changes often month by month. They just keep coming out with new versions of the language, the framework, and approaches. I mean, I personally find it confusing as all, simply because of like the language syntax changes so rapidly that some of these code solutions are like, okay, I need more literals and etc. in my development kits to kind of keep up with this. So yeah, I mean, it's you really want like what's the best practice right now.
Yeah.
And that's really what you're looking.
In this screenshot that you have taken, and this is real screenshot, right? So in this, they pretty much sorted the results based on the number of responses for the question, right? So yeah, naturally the older one with 14 answers is on the top, but as you said, in a language like Node.js, maybe the most recent one might be the accurate one.
Yeah, and also you're not, I mean, as you'll see on the next slide, you're not necessarily looking for 14 different answers to the same question. You're looking for the right answer, briefly stated.
Let's look at what happened when you clicked on one of those.
So yeah, I think this is the top answer, which is, what is the question? Is someone getting, I mean, this is somewhat endemic to Java, but it's just like you're escaping characters, and then you're escaping those, and it's because you're speaking, you're converting. It's the nature of injection is because you're transcoding a statement from one language to another. It's Java, a JVM talking to a database. You're making sure that that translation, that kind of conversation over an information boundary is secure. So it's the questionnaire has the right kind of mindset here. Is like, I know there's something I should be doing here. What can you help me out here? What's going on?
Got it. Okay, so moving on.
So I'm squinting at the screen here. Yes, so in actual fact, one of the top answer is like use prepared statements, which is correct. Which is the conversation should really stop there, but it should also. This is a band-aid. This is like, what am I? Why am I doing this? How does this protect me? You're not really explaining the underlying kind of security problem. You're just saying, just do this, and that's not satisfying as a developer. It's like, why should I do this? What's the risk if I don't? And is there other ways around it? It's like, you really need kind of more context than that. And also, if we go to the next slide, because of Stack Overflow being
sorry, Malcolm. So I mean, this I think goes back to that mindset, right? Like if you're just being told to do something, then chances of it naturally coming to you next time around is lower. Versus you understanding that underlying problem and why the solution helps.
Yeah, I mean, part of learning and growing as a developer is like, we all start out just kind of copying and modifying code. I mean, that's just the easiest way to get started. It's also like, we love kind of tinkering with things, but the next step is understanding why the code is doing what it is doing in a certain way, and what happens if you don't do that. So it's often like an interesting exercise to try and pick apart a library and build it yourself, and understand why it's very hard and why you've done everything the wrong way, and then going back to using kind of packaged ways of doing things. But until you, for instance, until you understand how an attacker takes advantage of SQL injection, then this is just kind of boilerplate code. It's like, you're going to keep making this mistake until you kind of know the essence of the problem.
Yeah, makes sense.
And the other side of this, Stack Overflow being a forum that kind of motivates people to kind of come involved in the conversation, which means there's a lot of kind of dynamic back and forth. But it also tends to introduce a lot of kind of either nitpicking or sowing of doubt, or like people going off on side tracks. And it's like, you're looking for like, okay, I'm solving one problem here. I don't need to get involved in a long discussion.
Yes, I've seen this, not just for the security part, but even questions in Stack Overflow saying, hey, how do I do X in this programming language? I mean, obviously there'll be that highly rated answer, but then there'll be like all these other options. And then people then start arguing about why the top answer is not the best one. There's more efficient ways of doing it. And then, yeah, you could go down a rabbit hole and spend so much time versus, if you had looked up like a book or something with concrete information.
Yeah, you also get the phenomenon of like, you look up in Stack Overflow, how do I do this? And the top answer is, don't do that. Which is the most frustrating thing in the world. It's like, don't do that, that's insecure. It's like, yeah, but I have to do that for these reasons. So like, no, we don't do that here. Which is like, it touches on, you have to, it touches on something like, you have to understand the risks around certain approaches, but it's often the top answer is flat out just banning you from certain ways of doing things, and that's very frustrating, especially if you like Google again and again, and every answer is don't do this. It's kind of the only time I will kind of scream at my laptop is when these very smug answers on Stack Overflow. Yeah, in this case, it's just like everyone's coming up with an opinion. So the next answer down is actually seems more authoritative, which is trust OWASP. It's a big name in the security field. We all know that they're on top of, especially finding vulnerabilities. They're very good at like kind of documenting and finding them and categorizing them. So you're looking for like a trusted name in security, you often kind of drift towards their solutions, which in this case is, doesn't even, oh, it does tell you what the OWASP ISAPI stands for, but it's there's a toolkit which should solve everything. So it seems like rather more than a band-aid, this is like a secure approach. It's a good name, a good brand you trust. I should check this out. So it's, I mean, this is the nature of kind of security research on the internet for Google, is like you're clicking through on links. You're going one link after the other, see how far the rabbit hole, and hopefully you get to the right place. But it's this seems like one of the more promising leads. So generally speaking, you're going to kind of see what OWASP has.
Yeah, and I mean, that's interesting. So, like, I mean, I've had this where a developer was asking, "Hey, I'm using ESAP. Why doesn't shift left acknowledge that as a proper validation?" Right? And I think what they did is they stopped at this point. They didn't even read further. They just figured out how to use ESAPI and they just put it into their code. Right? But I think let's move on in your example and see what happens if you were to read into it.
Yeah, so this is unfortunately the link through from the Stack Overflow here is here's the code, it's in legacy mode, and then it starts a big discussion. I mean, this tends to be like the way of OWASP projects. It's a bunch of OWASP researchers talking to each other, not necessarily talking to the audience about what this is and what it solves. So it's like you've kind of crept in on someone else's conversation, and it's like two Wikipedians arguing about an obscure topic. And it's like, I had a very concrete problem I'm trying to solve. Nothing here tells me whether I'm solving the problem or not. It does warn me possibly not to use this software because it's a legacy mode. I mean, everything's low. I estimate that most software on the internet is in legacy mode, but it's if you're plugging a new toolkit in, it's like you don't want to see this because it's obviously being replaced by something more secure.
Yeah. So in that example I mentioned, I think they did not realize it was in legacy, so they started like a developer I was talking to started using it. Right. So yeah, in this flow, it totally depends on where they might have seen this on Stack Overflow and the things that you mentioned. They see OWASP keyword, they see a very authoritative statement saying this will help you. And a lot of developers might just stop there and just start using it and thinking their job is done and move on. Right?
Yeah, and it also goes back to the point you're making about how this is an old answer on Stack Overflow. So although it's the top Google here, it's also the nature of links on the internet is they kind of they become obsolete. So this is a link to a prior version which still exists, but is not the toolkit they should be using.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the slide just talks about the just it being stamped with legacy. And then it has a link through the future development, the latest version, which at the time I was Googling this, is not available. They're talking about development release timelines for 3.x, which as a developer, I'm not interested in like future, like, what do you call it, vaporware. It's like, I'm trying to solve this by the end of the week so I can close my ticket out. So this is frustrating. I don't want to subscribe to the mailing list and get find out when it's available. So, but there is a version 2 somewhere out there on the internet. However, the link through to version 2 is broken, and you're hitting the kind of your least favorite kind of GitHub page where it's like, I'm lost. And you're like four or five kind of jumps down the rabbit hole now, and you're clicking on the most obvious thing in each point, but it's like it's a very simple problem you're trying to solve, and all of these distractions, and like as you said, from the Google search, there's 6 million different rabbit holes you could go down for one of the most common vulnerabilities and one of the most popular programming languages, and it's so easy to get lost.
Yeah. So I think, the problem statement is pretty clear, right? And I hope the audience doesn't feel like, there's no way out of this issue. So what would you recommend, Malcolm? What have you seen work with developers in big organizations? How do you build that security mindset?
So yeah, if you want to, so this is a statement of the problem here. We're drowning information. It's out there somewhere, but it's not kind of well maintained, and there's so many rabbit holes to go down. So we can do better. On the next slide, I think we touch on some of this stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's essentially, if you know how to solve SQL injection vulnerabilities, you know what a developer needs to see when one of these vulnerabilities occur. It's a very simple statement. You should use parameterized statements in your database driver. Here's what happens if you don't. Here's what an attacker could do. And then they can go, but not just, they can fix it, they can appreciate why the fix is necessary, and then they can do a bit of background learning and see how these kind of injection attacks and sort of trust boundaries are important to think about when they're writing code. And suddenly, not only have they fixed their ticket and they've secured the code base, they're also like aware of the problem in the future. So it's a very empowering thing to like stop being told you've done something wrong to go across to like, I can fix this, I know this, I've seen this before, I can tell other people about what they need to do and why.
Yeah, and another thing, Malcolm, I've seen with this approach is, in the absence of such an approach, like you have 200 developers in an organization, all 200 of them might be fixing the same thing in different ways, right? And like 6 months down the lane, when you have new people in the team, they would get confused, right? Like, why are some things done in some way, some things done in some other way across the code base? And then they might have their own new approach of dealing with things. So now you'll soon have like a mess of things in your code base, dealing with, say, simple things like, how do I deal with external inputs?
Yeah, or the flip side of that is you get a team of architects who say, okay, we don't trust our developers to know what they're doing. So here's a set of internal APIs and coding standards they had to adhere to. And it becomes a kind of a big rule book. It's like you must abide by the rules, but you still haven't done the work of like teaching people the very simple stuff to realize why the rules are in place. So it's the difference between like lecturing people and teaching, treating your kind of programming team as just a pair of hands who are just kind of typing away, producing code, or like someone empowering them to like make the right decisions the first time round. And that I mean, I've seen it in development teams. Once you have kind of a team that understands the issues, they teach each other, and new people coming in understand the same things, and it's basically kind of self-reinforcing. Whereas you can't introduce security after the fact and just kind of impose it on people. It has to be kind of come through the people actually writing the code day to day, or it just becomes either a free-for-all or an imposing set of kind of rules which kind of slows down development to like a snail's pace.
Got it. So I think you would say it's a combination of multiple things. I mean, people understanding why they're doing things in a certain way, so that base level of trusted education, And then on top of that, maybe they have standard frameworks. Like I've seen developers at customers we work with, where they have standard ways of dealing with, say, encoding an input, right? So, but they understand why they have to do it. So then they naturally start using that common method across their code.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's the best coding standards kind of arise kind of organically, and then everybody understands why it's done. If it's imposed by a kind of a top-down team and becomes basically dogma, then not only are you going to find edge cases which it doesn't address, but also your development team's going to get very unhappy about, okay, we're allowed to flip like literally free switches. It's like I'm plugging this API into this API. It's like my code doesn't, my job doesn't feel like significant, and the code I'm writing is kind of very abstracted from what I'm trying to do. It's a very frustrating way of kind of working.
Yeah, makes sense. So yeah, so then Malcolm, I think so on your website there is a free sign up option, right? Could you walk through what the audience can get there?
Oh yeah. So Hacksplaining is basically written by a bunch of us who come from a development background but got very good at kind of answering security questions because we used to sell instant messaging software to banks. And if you ever filled out a security questionnaire for a bank, it's often a 200-page PDF where they ask about what kind of rat poison do you use in your data centers and that level of detail. So we were kind of at the outset, we were looking for like, what's a good base set of security information you want every developer to know. And then we went away and created that. It's free to sign up for kind of personal use. So you can work through the exercises, demonstrates the vulnerabilities, and then how to, we're currently addressing around 27 vulnerabilities. We have a couple more coming out at the end of the year. And it breaks it down in the way we talked about. Here's how it's exploited. Here's the target information you need to know how to fix it, which you know, appreciate why it's necessary. And here's the kind of the broader security context if you want to do further reading. So it's very kind of, you can go through the exercises in about all of them in about a day. So it's not a 3-week training course sitting in front of PowerPoints, and it's free to access for personal use. If you want to put your development team through it and sort of track their progress, it's often kind of necessary for say compliance reasons, or kind of if you're just in a very kind of sensitive data environment, then you can buy an enterprise license and then kind of track off their progress as they go through the training.
Perfect. And then yeah, so you also feel free to go to shiftleft.io/register. Again, you get a free account there. It's not a trial account, it is a free account. You can analyze your own applications, or we've got a bunch of demo applications as well with vulnerabilities that we have injected into in different programming languages, right? So you can try them out. All you need is, if you have a GitHub repo, that would be the easiest way out. You just sign in through GitHub, and then you don't even need to like have a CI system or anything. Everything can be done just within a browser. Nothing needs to run off your systems or laptops. So yeah, you can sign up, you can register. It's a static analysis solution, so it looks for vulnerabilities in code. The OWASP top 10 kind of vulnerabilities that Malcolm and I have been speaking about. And yeah, so these two solutions go hand in hand, right? So like Shift Left can help find vulnerabilities in applications, and Hacksplaining can help educate your teams on how to go about fixing them.
Yeah, I mean, I was impressed by how easy it was to integrate into my GitHub repositories and get it running. What you find with a lot of security tools is the enterprise security group has purchased this tool and you'll be using this, and then you've got to plug it in. Whereas I think both of the solutions are like driven more by developer kind of empowering solutions. Like, okay, I find this useful, let me try it out. Okay, I'm going to recommend this to my boss. It's that's the kind of a correct way to kind of pick a solution, I think, rather than the chief security officer going off and playing golf with the Oracle rep or whatever. how big enterprise software sales happens.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. So as was mentioned in the beginning of the call, if you do have questions, please do post them in the questions tab. I've got some questions coming in already. So Malcolm, this is for you. Could you walk through, you mentioned the enterprise license and pricing for explaining. How does that work?
Oh, yeah. So essentially, I mean, one of the most common use cases is you're a firm that has to undergo PCI compliance. So you have mandatory security developing. That means you kind of work in the credit card industry. So you have mandatory security training annually for your team. And you want to make sure, you want to kind of certify that they've undergone this training on a regular basis. So yeah, essentially you sign up for an enterprise license. You can pay with a credit card. You can try get a free license for under 5 users just to trial it out, or we can send you an invoice, and then you're able to customize which training material is mandatory. Everything's available for anyone who's kind of more interested learners. But if you have like an essential set of vulnerabilities that are more applicable to your system, you can pick them. You can invite your team via email, or they can sign up via a GitHub login. And then you're off to the races. We also have a version that's available deployed within learning management systems. If you have a more kind of centralized training system, it's the same content, but it's you go to whatever, like Cornerstone or whatever, and click through it.
Got it. Perfect. And then I think question also around shift left enterprise. So yeah, so you can sign up for the free version, but if, as Malcolm was mentioning, if this is to be used in a larger enterprise where you want your team to be using it, you want most of your applications to be analyzed, then yeah, we have an enterprise tier which gives you access to more apps and more users. On our website, there is when you sign up for the free version, there is an upgrade option. You can try out some of the enterprise features on your own, and then obviously there's a contact us button where you can reach out and ask questions of our team. And so if that's the path you would like to pursue, yeah, you can do that from within the product once you sign up.
And I think it's worth mentioning is what I found is that, especially if you use GitHub right now, you'll get the Depender bot telling you there's been a security vulnerability discovered in this dependency you have, which is it's a nice kind of a really useful tool to have. But what it's not doing is actually kind of looking at your own code, your proprietary code. There's a big gap there. It's like, there's one thing to know that the third-party libraries you're using is insecure, and that's a great tool to keep on top of that. But it's like, what about my code? This is just a giant kind of black box that you don't really know. I mean, yeah, I've been.
I don't know if you've seen our offering, Malcolm. We also have what we call as a software composition analysis offering, right? So it's also available when you sign up. What we do beyond Dependabot is, or any of those what we call as legacy open source vulnerability solutions. Most of them just look at what packages you use in your application, look up against a database and say that, hey, these many packages are vulnerable. But there's some fundamental questions like, and as a developer, you might have known, right? Like when you try out something, you put that in your dependency file, you realize that library is not for you, you don't use it, but it's still there in your dependency file. So you keep getting alerted that your code is vulnerable, even though you don't even load the library in the first place.
Yeah, and because, and especially a language like Node.js, where you have these huge tangled dependency trees,
Yeah,
you'll get like every time you restart your application, you get like 5 warnings about prototype pollutions in this
exactly.
library you're not importing, but one of your dependencies of a dependency is importing, and it's like,
Yeah,
is this? Eventually, it just becomes noise because it's not targeted to
exactly.
like how you're using the code. It's just this. There's a theoretical vulnerability somewhere,
Yeah,
and yeah, your code base becomes big enough, you can just spend all day like playing whack-a-mole with these
exactly.
replacing dependencies. So.
So what we do differently there is we layer open source vulnerability detection on top of static analysis, right? So what we do in shift left is we can tell you if these vulnerabilities are actually reachable or not. So like, are you even loading that package? Are you even using any of those namespaces in your code? And then are there paths that lead to that package, the vulnerable packages?
Mm-hmm.
In which case, yes, it is high priority. You need to be fixing them first before you look at the rest of the list.
Yeah, that's fascinating actually. It's especially in this day and age, it's most of the code on your running web server is not written by you.
Yeah,
It's just kind of, there's all these lines of code, like what's actually being used and is it vulnerable or not, it is a really kind of essential signal to kind of securing yourself.
yeah, makes sense. Yeah. There's a question saying, does hacksplaining and shift left work together as a solution? That's a good question. Yeah, so that's something we get asked a lot, right? Where if I find a vulnerability, can I jump into training in that context of the vulnerability? So yes, that is something we are working on. We do not have it today, but yeah, that's on the near-term roadmap. So yeah, and then when you sign up for our free offerings, you would get access to that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the idea. I mean, that's what we've been selling here. Is like the automated detection of software bugs and having the right information to hand is a really kind of powerful kind of combination. So
Yeah, perfect. So I think this is a follow-up to what you mentioned. Maybe the audience didn't understand it well. So the question is, I'm part of the security team here, and I would like to deploy training across my dev team. Can I assign courses and track them to completion?
yes. So depending on how you want to do kind of signups or the rollout, if you have an existing learning management system, you can deploy Hacksplay into that just as a regular set of courses and use the existing interface. If you kind of more sort of lightweight solution, you can simply sign up for a license on the Hacksplaining website, invite people via email. You can also claim ownership, or you can ask that anyone who signs up for your email domain is automatically added to the license. And then you can track their progress through the training material, download progress reports, and also kind of chase up people who are kind of getting distracted and not kind of completing the training material in time. Yeah, so anyone, you can also assign other people as administrators, so it's you can kind of share the burden on that. So yeah, it's fully, you're basically buying the capability to kind of audit and make sure everyone's got through the material.
Got it. And you've got some more time. Maybe I'll take one or two more questions. So one is, how do I measure the efficacy of a program like this? Right. So Malcolm, what has your experience been with customers you work with rolling out a training program like this? Do you see benefits quickly? How long does it normally take? Is there a way that they go about measuring it?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Measuring the efficiency of like cybersecurity solutions is very hard. It's generally speaking, you know when you've got it wrong because you have a twit situation where they've hacked you and taken everything and it's too late. Yeah. So you can't. It's hard to measure the number of hacks that didn't happen. What you can do is just, generally speaking, talk to your development team and just like ask them, is this useful? Do you understand more than you were doing before? Is this too onerous? What's the balance for, what you want to avoid is just having a bunch of hoops for people to jump through, which is the traditional like once a year PowerPoint presentation. Here's let's learn about software security. If like the year comes around again and they're going through the training, it's like, yeah, I remember this. Yeah, this is all familiar to me. There's a few more vulnerabilities in here, but I'm actually using this stuff day to day. So that's the way you really measure the efficiency.
Malcolm, I was thinking, I mean, if you couple this with a static analysis solution like ours, right? So over time, you can see, like if this training has been deployed, you can see are those teams doing better? Are the net new vulnerabilities of certain categories falling over time?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we could do measurements like those, but then obviously there are factors that you can't control where, I mean, maybe new people are coming on board. So yeah, those things need to be controlled for. But I would imagine if you wanted metrics and if you want to manage it, that is a possible way.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, actually, static analysis does produce a lot of kind of useful metrics, and like you can produce kind of graphs and show kind of return on investment in that way. Especially if like you're trying to justify this to a manager, but it's also those kind of numbers trending down should just give you confidence in like, yeah. I mean, we all should lose sleep over deploying anything to the internet. It's the most target-rich environment, and everyone has access to our systems. So yeah, just once the code base gets big enough, it's like, can you ever feel fully secure that it's not vulnerable? And you can't ever get there, but we can get increasingly close to like entirely kind of secure systems, or at least like we've addressed all the huge screaming priorities which should keep us up at night.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the end of the questions we got in today. Thank you so much, Malcolm, for joining me today for this webinar on building a security.
It's been a pleasure, Arun.
Awesome. And thank you everyone for attending. At this point, let me pass this back to D-Zone.
All right. And with that, D-Zone would like to thank both of you, Malcolm and Arun, for your phenomenal presentation. Secondly, D-Zone would also like to thank Shift Left for providing the audience with a great webinar. Lastly, thank you to everyone who attended today. We hope you learned something new that will help you in your developer career. Have a great day.
Thank you.